Hello and welcome to Stephen University. This week we observed, see what I've done there, Chris? That's a reference to our other podcast. We observed maximum capacity. I mean, certainly for me, divisive episode, so I'm curious, Chris. Well, we'll get to your thoughts, I suppose, in a second. After, what was it about?
So, in this week's Steven Universe, Stephen and Greg were meeting up on New Year's Eve. They were discussing some fireworks, and they were putting away a big figurine, a big cardboard cutout of our boy Greg. They were going to put him in his garage, but Greg didn't have space. So they decided to clear out. It's New Year. Let's clear out let's clean up the garage. Stephen disappeared, brought back Amethyst to help with the garage cleaning. They started cleaning. Well, yes, because I mean, even I was like, "Well, he's going to bring Pearl," but he didn't. So
It's very well done, that.
Brought Amethyst. So she comes in inexplicitly. It's at this point that there's suddenly shitloads more room in the garage. Because as far as I can see, there's only 3 boxes outside, but they're roaming around. They're digging through things. There's lots of space all of a sudden to work with in that garage. We can only assume out of shot are all the other boxes and stuff.
Or you can assume a small bit of time has passed and they've been able to clear out some of the bulkier items.
Certainly enough to fit in the cardboard cutout, but anyway. So they start then cleaning, and Amethyst and Greg watch a TV show called Little Butler. Greg misses the fireworks, and it all becomes entangled in their Greg and Amethyst's relationship. And it all gets a bit heated and things get brought up, such as seemingly Rose spending more time with Greg, not Amethyst, when she fell for Greg. And then Amethyst does what can only be described as a dick move and shapeshifts into Rose. And it's all a bit weird. And then in the end, everyone makes up and that's cool. I will say, big thought. Now, for those that remember listening to last week's podcast, I got or last time's podcast, depending on whether it was last week or a few days ago. Last time, I got a little bit of shit from Dan. I got a little bit of shit because I made some grown-up insinuations from Stephen, like hiding under the duvet and stuff when Connie appeared, and got criticised for that. Because this is a kids' TV show. They'd never do anything like that or make adult jokes, would they? First of all, we have Amethyst say the sentence, "Don't worry, Greg, I've seen your junk plenty of times." And I was like, oh my, okay. And then they have a moment where Greg takes one of his adult magazines away from Stephen and says, "You can look at that when you're older." I mean, come on, like, whoa. So yeah, that's
Can I count? Am I allowed to counterpoint?
Yeah, of course.
Sure. Okay. I was just referring to turning a very sweet moment into something smutty because that is a particularly adorable moment. That was the crux of my problem with that.
Your complaint.
Yeah. You're welcome to point out any other smuttiness, but it was such a sweet moment. You've sort of ruined it by making it smutty. The moment we're referring to, if you didn't listen, was the moment when Connie sneaks downstairs to where Stephen is sleeping, not to do what teenagers tend to do, but to do what children do, which is something silly and fun, which is, in this case, they watch the snowfall, which is very sweet and very
Which I said was very sweet. I just pointed out that there was some nervous looks.
Thus ruining it for everyone else.
That didn't ruin it. What do you think of that? Do you think like kids shows have always had jokes like the magazine joke and the junk joke, and you just don't notice them because you're kids? Do you think? Yeah. Wow.
I mean, SpongeBob has so many of them. So many.
Really?
Oh, so many. Even the Animaniacs back in the day used to do a lot of adult humor, then sneak it in.
Fair play. Wow. I liked it more than disliked it in terms of its divisiveness. I wasn't left overly satisfied because I think probably the first time, it's very Steven Universe to be like, here's an onion, here's some real layers to this, here's some layers to how they dealt with grief, here's some layers to their friendship, here's some layers to what Rose's passing meant, here's some layers to what Greg and Rose's relationship meant. Here's some layers to what happens when you can shapeshift into the form of somebody who's gone. here's all these layers. And like I was like, they're never going to be able to like resolve this in a satisfying way. And I looked at the time and it was like the episode had like a minute left. And I was like, whoa. And I think it's not Steven Universe to present an onion with layers in an episode, but it's quite unlike Steven Universe to not really wrap those up. And, you know, maybe the ideas are so big that they shouldn't be wrapped up. But I just... I didn't have a problem with the episode. As a resolution, I think they delved into all this interesting stuff and then just went, but it's fine. She's given him a photo frame. It's all good. Like,
she cleaned out his thing for him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All good.
Yeah. I think that is the
thing with
crux
the
of the
episode.
issue, because I think when you leave that stuff hanging, when it's that emotionally wrought, you do run the risk of leaving a dissatisfied or even slightly sort of... Because basically, I think what the show tends to normally do is it brings up all these complex and conflicting emotions, but by the end, you understand where everyone stands and why they did what they did, and there's a certain amount of closure that sort of makes all of those seemingly irrational behaviors rational again. So you look at like On the Run and you see it's a perfect comparison to this, in my opinion, because On the Run, Amethyst again is the crux of the emotional sort of sort of pivoting of the story, and she's very conflicted in that episode. And at one moment she's like, "This is great. The kindergarten's where I grew up," and then she hates it, and she hates what it represents, and it's conflicting. But then by the end of the episode, you understand that conflict, that sort of that back and forth represents exactly how she feels on the inside. She is both conflicted about those things, but they're not contradictory as such. We talked about that when we talked about that episode. This one is to compare that to this. You've got this situation where Amethyst is sort of she misses Rose, but she also sort of Greg represents why Rose went away a little bit. And it's all very conflicted, but they don't get to the bit at the end where it all sort of smooths out in a way that you sort of understand every behavior, because I still don't know how... I still don't feel like they justified the emotional torture, essentially, that goes on there. And I think that's the reason this episode you leave feeling a little bit not sure, because you don't get the smoothing out bit that you get by the end of On the Run. You get it. You understand why everyone was coming from and all of the decisions they made. And at the end of this one, you still don't fully understand why Amethyst was such a dick in the first place. You sort of do, but you don't. It's not fully cleared up in a way that leaves you satisfied. That's for sure.
But not only that, but there's these weird implications and undertones that she's done that before and done that to him before.
Yes.
And you could almost... And again, it's not... I don't want to get a reputation as reading into things weirdly, but... You kind of almost just the way they are with each other, and even like, I know I made a joke of it, but even the slight flirtiness of "I've seen your junk," but like there's sort of this implication that maybe you know what I mean. I don't want to be accused again of making things weird, but I think there is this implication and idea that she is shapeshifted into Rose before, and I'm not saying anything weird happened, but like. That in itself is like an odd idea and an idea that you can't just hint at and then not explore.
Well, I think they sort
clarify.
I think that one. I think you get a little bit more clarification if you think back to something said earlier in the episode, because I had that when I first watched it as well. But on the rewatch now, I noticed obviously Pearl describes, they're not watching that show again. They've done this before and they disappeared for days, weeks, whatever, watching this show on loop. And then she goes, "I'm actually not sure why that stopped. It just sort of did." So in my head, eventually it became this thing where he wanted to get back to his life. And Amethyst, who was, it sounds to me, from what's said in this episode, that she sort of was using Greg to sort of replace the friend she lost in Rose.
Yeah.
And then when he decided to go back to the rest of his life and not just sit and watch Little Butler with her, she, I bet you'd have stayed for her, and it may have played out almost identically previously, and led to them sort of falling out, and hence why they haven't really hung out that much. Because it's true when you think back that they don't spend a lot of time together in the show.
No, and you do also get the implication that what I like is she clearly, from all we've been told about Rose's character and the information we now have about her backstory, from a previous episode, the one with the gem, what were they called? Gen Kindergartens. Like, you can assume that Rose really spearheaded the no, let's take care of her. She is great. Like, you get the feeling that she really was very, very important to Amethyst.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%.
And that essentially losing her twice, as she potentially did once when she started hanging out with Greg and fell in love with Greg, and once when
she disappeared, essentially to become Steven.
Yeah. So you get that.
Yeah, 100%. So it's one of those things where when you analyze it, you can make it all make sense. But when you just finish watching the episode, it just feels off kilter and odd, and nothing really feels like it gets the satisfactory resolution you get from an On the Run. And I think that might just be a matter of running out of time, running out of steam.
Yes, yeah. And other shows are guilty of it. There's an episode of Doctor Who I actively dislike because the episode builds at a really nice pace, and then the conclusion is about 40 seconds long. That's the power of 3, for anyone wondering. It happens.
Yeah.
But maybe have less it's like you don't need the magazine scene. It adds nothing. You don't need him collecting breakfast from Frybo's. You know what I mean? There are things you could cut.
Well, see, I don't know if I agree. The magazine thing reestablishes that he's banned from TV, which is a running joke in the episode. And I think the going to get the breakfast is him setting up how important going to see the fireworks with his dad is. So when his dad misses that, you understand the importance of it.
Yeah. Okay. Fine. Yeah, that's a good point.
I can't remember the last time I just where I made a counterpoint and you just died. You just went, yeah, fine, okay.
No, it's right. No, but you're right. Like, yeah, it's a good point. Like, solid logic.
That was amazing. Usually you put
so
more
how
of
do you
a
do
fight
it
than
then?
that.
How do you do it then? Like, do you...
for me,
do you put less layers in? But what layers do you take out?
No, I
they
think
all naturally
if I was
into each other.
If it was me looking at the episode, I would potentially think about maybe sort of trimming some of the stuff towards the beginning of just like them discovering, like we don't need to have them have a reason to need to clean out. Like, they just have them be cleaning it out, and it like, this is ridiculous. This is going to take forever. We're a couple of days off New Year's. I want to get this done before the New Year. We need help. Bring in Amethyst. You do that in like 10 seconds, and you've saved the first 2 minutes of the show. Like, instantly.
That feels very un-Steven Universe, though, doesn't it? Like,
yeah, I suppose.
Have that cardboard cutout.
Yeah, cardboard cutout, which was funny. But
yes, I mean, at the end of the day, maybe and again, maybe
it was just too ambitious. Maybe it was just too ambitious. I go back
to, and I wouldn't be surprised if comments are yelling this. At the end of the day, maybe there is nothing wrong with it being so big an issue and so big a deal and so important that you just go, yeah, this is some pretty big shit. Like this, maybe Amethyst and Greg's relationship and the difficulties connected to that should run for the whole series. Maybe, if you get a resolution, maybe you aren't able to go back to it as easily.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, because isn't that the crux of Steven's speech at the end? Steven makes a speech that sort of puts an end to a lot of it. And let me see if I can find the transcript. 1 second. Here we go. So Steven says, let me find a big chunk where Steven talks forever. Here you go. So this is when Steven sort of leaps up and realizes that Amethyst is in Rose's form, and the look in his face then it's beautifully animated because it is just like devastation and anger. It's really well done. And he says, what are you two doing? I get it. It's hard to deal with stuff from the past. You want to put it off because there's tons of it. It's really heavy and it means a lot to you. So it's hard to let anything go, but you've got to, because this thing is full. And then he picks up the cat carrier. Seriously, where did you even get a cat? And then he throws it down. that's what that is. So he's right. Like, that's interesting because in a way he's summing up what we're sort of almost criticizing it for, because like sometimes you just have to let that stuff go because there's no dealing with it because it is that huge. So maybe that's what we're getting at.
Isn't it crazy though that we get We get moments like that of like, does it reach a point? Can it reach a point? And I can't think of a contradiction, but like you have a moment like that, which is so eloquent and beautiful and wisdom beyond his years, and then you like have another episode where someone takes away his ice cream and he gets pissed. Like, do you know? And I know that's a flippant. I can't. Maybe the fact that I can't think of an example proves my point is invalid. But like, that's a real maturity there. And you know, do you reach a point where if you have Stephen do speeches like that and make the decision he made in the test episode, you can't have him getting, you know, shitting his pants about future vision and sitting on the roof, you know?
Yeah, maybe. I think the ice cream example is obviously from the pilot, and it's interesting that people I see this on fandom a lot coming up. You know, like every time an episode airs that's like a big, you know, something huge happens, you get this thing. It's like episode 1, Steven's sad he lost his ice cream. Episode, you know, we'll use this as an example. You know, 40 odd. Amethyst, you know, emotionally tortures his father by becoming his mother. Like, you know what I mean? Like it's a running joke that like the show obviously gets a lot more dramatic and thematically moves to a very different place than where it starts. But I don't know if it's an interesting point because you're right. One next to the other would look odd, but I don't feel like I feel like they've slowly matured him in a very sort of balanced way. I don't feel like we're getting those sort of peaks and troughs. And you're right. If you were to snip out everything between the first episode and this one, you'd be like, who is this character? Because he's not the little shitbag that was complaining about missing his ice cream last week.
But I'd so much. I maybe chose a bad example because that you know happened. That I picked literally the pilot. But yeah, my point was more because I can't remember it, but there was an episode recently where I was like, it feels like Steven's gone back a few months.
Yeah, which episode was that? I would be curious if we can remember what that was.
I can't remember.
I
would rather see a show do this though, because like one thing, I love sitcoms, and you know, I think it's fair to say in animated shows it happens as well. You get these moments where like characters learn lessons, and a real bugbear in a way is that they don't remember them. Like, and you could say that, like, I think the Office is a good example of a show where the characters are in a very different place at the end of the series to the beginning of the series in terms of emotions and attitudes. You know, I think it's you could point to Friends and go, oh yeah, but they're, you know, Rachel's moving on, and you could point to most shows and go, the situation is different. But I think it's harder, like The Simpsons, fucking Homer's learning a lesson every week and the next week forgetting it. I think it's harder to find shows where there's emotional growth and character growth, and this is a show where that's already being seen 40 episodes in, and I think that's an impressive feat and something that does elevate it. But you gotta stick with it for the you gotta really stick with it for those first 20 episodes.
But you know what though, I think that in a weird way, like a lot of those first few episodes, there is a lot of grounding there that makes a lot of this stuff work. If the show had started not literally here, but at this level, it'd be too much, wouldn't it? If the first episode had dealt with Amethyst like emotionally, I keep using that phrase because it's from something else, but that whole Amethyst emotionally torturing Steven's dad by becoming his dead mum is like, it's really heavy stuff. And if you start at that level, you're fucked. Like, no one's watching that show. Do you know what I mean? Like, I'm turning that off. It's, first of all, I'm not invested in the characters because we're just starting at that point, and second of all, that's really depressing shit. But of course, once you put it in the context of a show that's proven itself to be light and fun and amusing around that, you get away with having these moments. You couldn't do this every week. It'd be a disaster. But the fact that the show can go there now is a testament to the grounding they built. And I think that even though you're right, you've just got to get through those first sort of 10, 20 episodes to get to the real emotional sort of grit of the show. I do think those episodes are important. I would never suggest to anyone to skip episodes of this show. And people people always say, "Oh, start on Giant Woman," or "Oh, start on such a thing."
No. That's like to bring up again. You and I are both, because we've had this discussion before. You and I are big. I hate when people say, skip season 1 of the US office,
Yes.
because season 2 begins with an episode called The Dundies that literally lives or dies or when you know the characters. If you know the characters, that episode is a hoot. If you don't know the characters, it's not that funny. And to get to know the characters, you do need to watch season 1.
Like, and it's only 6 episodes. It's hard to really...
Yeah. Not only that, but only episode 1 is that bad. Only episode 1. And if you haven't seen the UK office, it's probably not even that bad. It's just bad because you go, well, this is the same as the UK office. Actually, Diversity Day, healthcare, sexual harassment, they're all really good episodes.
Yeah, there's some good comedy in them for sure. I mean, particularly whichever episode, I think it's Diversity Day, when they're wearing the tags on their heads for the different races. That's genius. Very funny. Yeah. It's
Michael.
So I would.
Michael makes himself Martin Luther King.
That's right. Yeah.
So,
to bring it back to that, I think that you're right to say that it's an interesting observation about the growth of the show, but I do think it's been organic, and I don't think they're too often backtracking. I think it's, generally speaking, very smoothly gone sort of forward and evolved in a very natural way. And again, you're right, this puts it leagues ahead of most animated shows. Not most these days, actually. There's a fair few that do this, but like the standard animated shows where the next week the characters have forgotten everything they learned the week before is remarkable. I mean, you look at The Simpsons is a perfect example. Simpsons is exactly the perfect example. No one ever learns anything in that show.
On an episode of TV Fight, someone was arguing for the episode with the crayon, like up his nose, for why it was amazing and what he learns and stuff and takes forward. And it's like, but he doesn't.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
That's why the episode that's really effective of that show is the one that ends with all the pictures on his wall at work, and you realise he's working that crappy job for his kids. And the reason that works is it's a different angle of his desk that we don't usually see, so you just assume they're always there, and that's fine. Like, because it can't be contradicted. But yes, back to I thought it was an episode that did a lot of great things and a lot of interesting things. That maybe didn't resolve them all, but we have over the course of this discussion perhaps proven that it didn't need to resolve them all, and actually is effective because it didn't. So.
Yeah. Interesting little side note that the theme song lyrics to Little Butler have been muted on TV airings in the States since last year, and no one knows why.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
That's odd.
Yeah, for some reason, since May 14th, 2016, the lyrics to Little Butler, whenever that episode is replayed on TV, have been muted. The song plays and the visuals are still there, but there's no words, and don't know why.
I mean, it's a weird looking show, but
yeah, it's a really weird show. Did you like the references potentially to Fresh Prince and Saved by the Bell?
Yeah.
Because You People Have Too Much Money is definitely a Fresh Prince reference. And the 2-part Hawaii special, I mean, that is very clearly...
That is Saved by the Bell Hawaiian style. The
which
TV
was,
movie.
I believe, a 2-part Hawaii special, if I'm not mistaken.
I think it aired as a TV movie. And
did it?
They maybe broke it down. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, when I saw it when I was younger, I saw it broken down.
There's also this weird run of episodes where they're just like working in a beach hut or something.
Yeah, that's right.
No, they're two different things. There's like the beach hut episodes, and then there's literally, I think, a TV movie set in Hawaii.
I'm agreeing with you. Yeah, that's exactly correct. They do, because all the specials take place, if memory serves, after the show had ended. I think because there's 2 specials. There's a Hawaii one and there's a Vegas one, and the Vegas one is relating to Zach and Kelly's potential wedding, and I think the Hawaii one is directly after the show, and it's just like them on holiday.
I think so. Yeah. Stay tuned for Saved by the Bell Time Out, which is going to be... no, we'd just call it Time Out, and it's our Saved by the Bell watching book. I'm joking.
I start every week by going, welcome to Saved by... Time Out, guys. This week we're talking about... And I do the whole shtick.
No, it starts with me going, when I wake up in the morning, and then you just go, Time
Out. Guys, this week we're talking about episode 1, the pilot.
There actually is. I don't know the name of it, but there is a Saved by the Bell podcast where she watches an episode a week and gets a different guest on each week to talk about it. And like some decent guests, like Chris Hardwick did it, and yeah, I can't remember what it's called, but I think that's one of those things where we go, you know what, someone else has already done the Saved by the Bell podcast.
From the perspective of us recording this, by the way, this week they launched an official Steven Universe podcast, and Rebecca Sugar's on the first episode, and I'm annoyed. She's the creator and main writer. What are they doing? It's like they don't care about what we're doing over here, Chris.
I guarantee they don't.
I don't know they don't care. I guarantee it.
I think it's pretty, 20 weeks of us, or probably 15 weeks of us doing it, and suddenly there's an official one. I'm just saying. I don't think the two things are linked at all. But
anyway, so that, I guess, is everything for this week. I believe next week's episode is called Marble Madness, so we'll be back to chat about that at some point. I don't know why I talk like this. It's weird.
No idea.
Stop doing it, Dan. I can't. It doesn't end. The awkward endings are back, awkward apparently. That's mostly awkward through the due to the utter silence from Chris there. Just
yeah. Do you know why? It's because it wasn't very entertaining, Dan.
Yeah. I figured that out, but after the fact, really frustratingly. Figured that out at the end when it was just ringing silence. Yeah. Anyway, that's everything for this week, and it's all gone awkward again. I've been Dan Doolan.
I've been Chris Billingham.
And I guess we'll see you next time if we haven't argued after this about Chris not supporting me in my comedy. Bad comedy. Correction. But we'll see you next time as we discuss Marble Madness.
That was the best piece of self-correction I've ever seen. Not supporting me in my comedy. Bad comedy. Like, you knew that you couldn't get away with referring to it as comedy.
I couldn't get away with calling it comedy. I couldn't. And you know what, Chris? It's not even that I couldn't get away with it. I couldn't live with myself. That's the real issue. I couldn't sleep at night knowing I'd called that comedy.